Okay, so we are live. Okay, so for those on the live stream, we're going to get started in about 5 minutes. Just waiting to make sure that everyone here is set up and ready to go. Okay. Just want to test this real quick. we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Let me start recording. Boop. And okay. Hey everyone, welcome to another session of your. Oh, there she is. How's it going? You made it. Did you come from the event? Okay.
I do know that some, at least quarter of my students, so.
That's what?
We was trying to get them out.
Okay. Should I wait?
No, if it's done, it's
Yeah, we definitely don't want to be here till 9 or something. This will probably be shorter though, because it's pretty condensed what I'm going to show. So that should be good. Toasty.
So I know that was cool, the info.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hey everyone, welcome to the third session of You're Doing It Wrong. This session will be over InDesign. I'm very excited about this session because InDesign is one of the programs by Adobe that I think not enough people are using to do some really cool things. So we're going to talk about its pros, its cons, its strengths and weaknesses, and how we can really start using this powerful tool to the fullest and stop using Photoshop and Illustrator for things that you should be doing in InDesign. So a little bit about YDIW. If this is your first session, welcome. Glad to have you. You're Doing It Wrong is a tutorial series that I started back in the fall of 2016 when I was a college student. I was always the guy to help people with the software and design questions that they had. And so I wanted to create a session that allowed me to basically brain dump the knowledge that I had gained on this software and have it be a resource for designers and architects in school and in the profession. So I want basically the goal is to work smarter by knowing how to maximize your workflows in the software to get the most out of them. So I feel that a designer should be versed in all tools available to him or her so they are never bottlenecked by the lack of knowledge of any specific tool. So it's important to be in the know. So this is a session roadmap. So we've already done Photoshop in March, and we did Grasshopper and Rhino last month in April. This month is InDesign. Next month will be Illustrator. July will be Revit. August will be Dynamo. September will be a double feature, Enscape and Lumion. October, Geographic Information Systems, also known as GIS. November will be fun. It'll be on Premiere Pro and After Effects, another double feature, working with animations and videos in our designs. And then December will be Bluebeam, and then next year will be a totally fresh roadmap of sessions. So excited to see what those will be. I would love to get your input on that, so definitely reach out on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and let me know your thoughts. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about InDesign, things that you're going to be learning about this session. You're going to be learning how to use techniques for proper publication design, learning the pro tools of InDesign, so not just here's the pointer tool, here's the text tool, but here's how you can get the most out of each of them. So you're going to be learning about master pages, character styles, paragraph styles, and graphic standards. Okay, so software in this session, mainly InDesign. I'll touch Illustrator a little bit and a little bit of Photoshop maybe, but just to prove a point about the differences between the software and how they relate to each other. So there's the age-old question. If you are in the design profession, you've probably asked yourself this question at least once. Which software should I use for a specific purpose? InDesign or Illustrator? And I'm here to tell you that that's the wrong question. You should be using both. So it's not InDesign or Illustrator. It's InDesign and Illustrator. You have to use both because both were designed for different purposes. So InDesign is designed for boards and layouts, slide presentations, books and publications, compositions, portfolios, resumes, cover letters, flyers, and any organizational text and images that you'll be putting together in a composition. You do not use Illustrator to create new vector graphics or original vector graphics or photo editing. You use Illustrator and Photoshop for those specific tasks. And then you bring them into InDesign to organize them. So InDesign is mainly an organizer for finished work. It does have vector editing capabilities, but they're nowhere near as good or as powerful as Illustrator. So if you're creating new vector graphics, create them in Illustrator and then copy and paste them into InDesign. You will work much faster and you'll be much happier with the results when you work that way. So it's all about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each software. So Photoshop, raster image pixel editing, right? That's Photoshop's strength. You should not be using it for anything else. Illustrator, vector graphics, composition as well. Really taking advantage of the power that vector graphics has. That's Illustrator. And then InDesign is an organization, right? You're putting all of those things together in a composition, in a book, in a slideshow, in a presentation, in a portfolio. That's what InDesign's strength is, and that's what you should be using it for. So if you're making a flyer in Photoshop, you're doing it wrong. Like, you just are. So here's how to do it better. So let's talk about the parts, the major parts of InDesign, and then we'll jump into it. So let's talk about what you'll be editing on. 1 second. Can someone go get Adiba, please? I will pause and wait till you're free to get back. One second here. We're gonna get someone who needs to get up to the 5th floor. Hi. I'll be fine. I'll get it afterwards. So for those on the live stream, these sessions are the live streams are pretty raw. The idea though is that I'll be going back through and taking the raw footage and cutting it down to just the session. So we're cutting out the pauses and the times where I'm going back to help someone with their on their computer. So it will be very smooth on the rewatch, but I haven't gotten to that yet. It's very busy. So just hang in there real quick. She's on 4th. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, we are back in business. So I'll let you guys go ahead and set up, but I'll keep going. Okay, so let's talk about the different aspects of InDesign, and then we will jump into the program and go over some really cool things in it. So, when you're working in InDesign, you're working primarily on pages. You need to think of it like a book if you're working on a book, or like a slide presentation like PowerPoint but better. But when you have a page, it's a single page, and when there are two pages put together, they're called spreads. And these two terms are very important, so make sure that you note these things. And this is one of the things that I will be talking about in every session are key terms that you need to remember. So if you're stuck somewhere, you know how to properly search for the correct solution. So it's like, oh, right, I know they're called pages. How do I combine two pages together? Or how do I shift two pages together? And so that makes that process a lot easier. Now, Illustrator calls its main work area the artboard, and Illustrator or Photoshop calls its the canvas. So just be knowledgeable of the terminology of the work areas. But in InDesign, it's pages and spreads. Composition and grids. And so InDesign is designed to allow you to compose your spreads in graphically awesome ways, because it gives you the tools of guides and margins. Guides are customizable by you. Actually, both are, but guides help you align your images and text inside the pages and spreads. Margins allow you to make sure that you're giving enough space on the edge of the page to prevent cutoff. So if you're, for example, printing a book, oftentimes when you do that, anything outside of the margin is liable to get chopped just because of the way books are put together. So things that should never go past the margin: text and important information you want people to see. You should always keep those elements inside the margins at all times. Now, images and graphics are okay to go past the margin and go to the end of the page, and that's called full bleed. That's totally fine. But text and images, or text and important information, always keep inside the margins. And I'll show you how to modify margins later on, but usually they start at either 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch, and you can customize each one of those elements. But when you get a good grid system together, you can really create some interesting compositions that work together. So each spread can have its own flair, but they're part of an overall arching system. Text and formatting. So when you're editing and working with text, there are several key terms that you should know about. So leading is the spacing between the bottom edge of each text line. Kerning is the spacing in between the text letters itself. And tracking is the length of the entire text line itself. And so when you understand and know what these terms mean, you can modify the text that you're working with in InDesign. So you can customize the way your paragraphs and captions look. Then it gets to justification. So this is really important when you're modifying and customizing text on your spreads. Left justified, and there are two types of left justification. There's left justified with the right edge aligned, which means that all of your text will align on both the left and the right side. And then the last line will be left as is. And then just regular left aligned, where the text isn't going all the way to the edge, but when text becomes too long, it goes to the next line. Right edge justification and left edge justification will tend to stretch out the spacing or the spacing in between each word, and so sometimes you get rivers, and I'll show you what that looks like. So graphically, it might not look that strong, but it does look really nice when both sides align, which is why a lot of designers like to use them. And that just comes with modifying the tracking and the kerning to get it to look as good as you can. Of course, there's also center justification for anything that you're doing with centered. But you can modify just about every aspect of text in InDesign. It's the best tool for that. You can do a little bit of that in Illustrator, but if you're modifying text, you should be doing that in InDesign. Okay, so images and frames. And so this is really important when modifying images and cropping images in InDesign. So imagine when you're working with images, you're working with two boxes. The first box is the frame, and so think of it like a window. And behind that is the actual content, and that is, the image that you're showing. And you can modify the size of that window and crop and show specific parts of the content and hide other parts. And so this is really awesome when there's a part of an image that you don't want to see, or you want to make an image portrait when it's originally landscape. Of course, you're hiding a lot of content when you're doing that, but you can use that to selectively modify and compose your spreads. And your frame does not have to be a rectangle. It can be just about any shape that you can draw, any vector shape you can draw can become a frame for your images. And we'll go through that too later on. Okay, so that's it with the introduction. Let's go ahead and jump into the software. And we're going to talk about a lot of the tools that are available to you here. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is the presentation that I basically just showed you that I composed in InDesign. We will start a brand new document, but I just want to go over some of the interface and the things that you need to be paying attention to when working in InDesign. So just like in Photoshop and Illustrator, you've got your key toolbars here. So your pointer tools, your pen tools, your rectangle tools, your shape tools, your cutting tools, eyedropper. These are all tools that are universal between those programs. And if you're familiar with Adobe Creative Suite, you're familiar with these tools. Of course, you've got your main toolbars or tabs at the very top. Things that you should be paying attention to are your layout tab, which has pages, margins, rulers, guides, and some other important tools there. Type, which allows you to modify text. So text is also called type in InDesign. Object, which allows you to modify shapes. Views, your window toolbar. So if you're missing a toolbar that I'm working on, you can find it under window. Some ones that are really important to have are pages, layers, links, stroke and color and swatches, character and paragraph styles, and some other things, and we'll go over that. Then you have your ribbon tabs, and the ribbon tab, the tools that are available here change based on what's selected. So if you select a shape, you'll see some different tools up here. You'll see X and Y, which is its positioning on the page or spread. You'll see its width and height. And I use these tools all of the time because if I want something to be in the exact same location, and for example, I can't copy and paste because I brought it in from a different program, these tools allow you to position them on the spread, and they're very handy. You've got your fill and your stroke, which if you've used an Adobe program before, you know what that means, but if you haven't, the fill is the inside color of a shape, and the stroke is the outer outline of the shape, and both can be customized in terms of their color, and strokes can be customized in terms of the size. So if you've got a shape here, and you hold shift and you create the shape, you can see that that's just a stroke, that's a vector, and it has a point of 1. Of course, you can make that 10. If you've used these programs before, you know this already. Okay, now let's talk about the side panel here. You've got your pages panel. Your pages panel is the most important because, like I said, InDesign is designed to work in pages and spreads and slides, which is different than Illustrator, which uses artboards which float around the canvas, and Photoshop, which uses one canvas at a time. So InDesign is designed to work with publications. So if you're doing anything like that, you should be using InDesign. All of your pages are laid out here, and you can double click on the page preview and jump directly to the page, which allows you to modify that. You can also rearrange pages. So if you want one page to be behind another, you just move it where it needs to be. This is also where you copy pages. So if you need a page to be duplicated, you can click on the page preview, the thumbnail, hold Alt, grab the page, and move it back. And that page will then be duplicated, and you can move it where it needs to be. So I'll Control Z that away. so that's that. Master pages, which we'll talk about in a second, are housed up here. And master pages allow you to modify elements that show up in every single spread, which is super, super handy if you're doing a consistent graphic or page numbers or a page identification. And so we'll talk about that too. Layers are here. So if you just like in Illustrator and Photoshop, layering is important. So you've got things showing up on top where they need to be or below where they need to be. Links are very important. Any images that you bring into InDesign are still housed on your Explorer or Finder if you're working on Mac. They are not housed inside InDesign. So for example, Photoshop, when you import an image into Photoshop, that image is embedded in Photoshop. So if you move the Photoshop file somewhere else, all of the images go with it. That is not the case with InDesign. InDesign uses links. So it's looking at your computer for where that file is located. If you move your InDesign file and you don't move your links, it will lose those links and those images will be lost in your composition. It'll show you a fuzzy preview, but it'll give you an error saying, I don't know where this image is anymore, and you need to relink it. So links are very important. And I'll talk about how to quickly move links with your InDesign files later on when we talk about packages. InDesign is really powerful in that it can also create interactive files. So you can create buttons and bookmarks which allow you to jump from page to page like you would a really old website or an interactive PDF. And so we'll talk about that too, which is really cool. And then you've got your color editing tools, stroke, color, swatches, effects, and then some other tools. So this is a toolbar or orientation that's customized for the way I like to use InDesign. Yours will almost certainly look different than the way mine looks, but again, you can continue to modify them here under Window if you want something in here that's not there yet. You just click on it, and then you pop it into the toolbars there. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's create a new file and start going through how I set up all of my documents, and then we'll start modifying images and text and things like that. So when you go into InDesign, when you open it for the first time, it will ask you for a new type. I usually pick document. Books are pretty different. They allow you to do some different things. I haven't used books very much. Documents seem to work for a majority of what I need them to work for. But when you open a new file, you can modify the width of the starting pages. It uses several units: picas, points, inches, millimeters. We're going to use inches because that makes sense. I'm going to think of this like a portfolio. So I'm not going to use 8.5 by 11 for a portfolio. That's a little big. But we can do maybe a 7 by 9. And so I'm modifying the width and the height. I chose inches. That's a portrait orientation. If I click on landscape, the two values flip. Facing pages basically means, do you want this to be a book, right? So a book has two pages that are connected together, which create a spread. If you uncheck facing pages, you'll get a slideshow basically. So each page is separate.
Quick question.
Yes.
If you are just shown pixels and not inches, how do you toggle between that?
So it depends on the type that you're clicked on. Right now you're clicked on screens. If you switch to print, it will show you inches. And also you need to switch from touch mode to keyboard mode, which you'll see at the very top right. No one uses touch mode. No one uses touch mode. Okay, and then if you click on print, you'll see inches as an option. So InDesign is designed to work with with many types of file formats, I guess. So if you're using web versus print, it'll show you different options there in terms of page layout and size. Okay. So facing pages, again, if you want a book, have facing pages checked. If you want a slideshow, have facing pages checked off. And then, of course, you can type in your starting amount of pages. I'll type in 10 for now, but of course you can type in as many as you want. Actually, I'll use 11. Columns, you can set your margins here. and your bleed and slug, we'll go ahead and hit create for now. And make sure, actually, let me change that back to inches and 7x9, which is a nice size. 11 pages, half-inch margins, that's good. Okay, create. Okay, so now we've got our document created. And let's actually add an extra page at the end so it looks like a book. And I'll hide overlays. So you see all the pages that I have here. And so, for example, the slideshow presentation just has each one by itself. When you're creating a book with facing pages, you'll see that each page is opposing, and you can flip them around. There's no content on here, so you won't see anything happen. But if there was, for example, if I draw a shape here on that page and flip it to a solid color, I can then move that where it needs to be, move that around, which is very handy when you're modifying this information. Now, another really important thing, for example, if you're putting a board together, I'm going to do another one and change it to inches and make it 24 by 36 and say 4 and hit create. Let's say you're creating a final presentation board for final reviews in InDesign and you hit facing pages. Well, it's not going to be a book. You're probably going to want these boards linked up side to side. And the way by default InDesign is locked into the book format, but you can change that by right-clicking on the page and unchecking allow pages or allow document pages to shuffle, and also unchecking allow selected spreads to shuffle. This will allow you then to link more than one spread together and create basically your board layout, which is really handy. And that center bar really doesn't matter when you're doing a format like this. Okay, but let's go back to books. So all my pages are here. One of the first things that I do is I create my guides, I create my page numbers, I create my character and paragraph styles, and we're going to go ahead and do that now. So, master pages. You can see that each one of these pages has an A on it. And that means that all of these pages have the A master applied to them. Right now, the A master has nothing on it. But if I apply a shape to the A master page, let's say it's a graphic that runs along the bottom, and I make it run across the bottom, you'll see that that bar now shows up in all of my spreads because all of my spreads have A master applied and I've modified A master. Now when I go to the spreads and I try to click on that bar, I can't because that's an element that's locked to the master page. So this is great when you have a graphic that you don't want to have to worry about messing around with, but you want to show up on as many pages as you have set to. This is how you do that. So I'm going to delete that. And let's say you have multiple types of pages, right? You can create as many master pages as you need to do that. So if your master page bar is not visible, just grab the little adjuster and increase it. But let's say I always have at least 2 master pages, but sometimes more. So let's say that A master will be blank and B master will be the one that will have my page numbers applied to it. So let's create a page number. Page numbers are special markers. And when they're placed on a master page, all of your page numbers in your book will automatically update, especially when you move things around, add new pages. Super handy. I remember creating a publication in 3rd year of architecture school, and I didn't know this. So every time I created a new page, I had to make sure that the page number was correct. And this wastes an immense amount of time. So learn how to work smarter by learning all of the tools that are available to you. So let's go ahead and pick a font that's great. And I'm going to go ahead and pick, let's say 9. And I'm going to create a page number on the master spread. Remember that. So I'm going to create a page number. And when you're creating text in InDesign, you always create text boxes. This is different in Illustrator. In Illustrator, you can create text in lined format and in box format. In InDesign, it's only box format. So when you're creating a page number, you always want to create a text box that fits at least the number 100. That's usually a good rule of thumb. If it's too small to fit 100, then you'll probably end up cutting off pages. Let's say if you're making a really long portfolio or you're making a book. Of course, you want the numbers, the biggest numbers, to also be able to show. Right, so type in the number 100 to just confirm that it's big enough. And you can also justify that text box to be in the right location. And you can also have it be on both sides. So if I hold Alt and then I grab the box, I can make a copy and move it to the opposite edge of the page. And then double click on it and left justify it. Now the number 100, when I apply the spread, and you apply master pages by just dragging them down and placing them on the page. Right now it says 100, so that's not correct, right? So I haven't actually done the special character yet. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to right click. You're going to go to Insert Special Character, Marker, Current Page Number. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Right click, Insert Special Character, Marker, Current Page Number. And you'll see that both of them turn to the letter B that represents the B master. And now when I go to the spreads that have B master applied to it, the page number is there where it needs to be in the format of the one that I created before, which is super handy. So you can have your page numbers and customize them however you like, that you think looks interesting. So if I go to issue.com, for example, and I go to a publication that I've made, which is my latest portfolio that I, of course, designed in InDesign, you'll see that some pages have a page number, some don't. And I have this graphic element here on the page number. That's one that I also put in the master spread, so it shows up every time. And these elements that you see here were also designed to apply to every page respectively. So in some pages it says architecture, and some it says landscape. All of that information is done in the master page. So let's say I want a graphic that also goes around. Oh, actually I will not do it here. I would do it in the master page, right? So let's say we'll create a graphic here. And we'll make it black, and then we will send it behind the text box. So right now, if you go to arrange, there's a bunch of tools when you right click. There's transforms, which are awesome. This time I'm going to arrange and send it to the back, and then I'm going to change the color of the text box from black to white. So I'm going to go open color, set it to white, and so now that graphic is there. Nice, and give it a little bit more space. If you hold Alt when you're modifying a text box, it'll modify on both sides at the same time, which is handy. And then we'll copy that to the other side. And we will make that text box black, or white, sorry. And so let's say this is great for text pages that have a white background. But let's say we have text pages that have a dark background based on the content that's on the page. I'm going to create another master with flipped page numbers, right? Or a flipped color scheme. So we'll make the text black and the box white. And we'll do the same thing over here. So this is just me prepping for any possibilities that I'll have in the book. Right, so I'm just setting all this information up pre. So for example, just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to apply the C master to the spread, and I will create, let's say this is an image file, and make sure this is sent to the back. And we'll talk about layers in just a second to avoid this situation from happening every single time. Actually, let's talk about that now. So I'm going to go to layers real quick. And I always create 3 layers. One layer is I call it master bottom. And this is content that is on a master page that should always be behind everything else that I create. And I also create one called master top. And this is for content like page numbers that should always be on top of any content that I create. And so I'm going to go back to the master pages and place that content on master top so they always show up above, right? And let's do the same thing with C master, select them, layers, master top. Now, if I had, for example, let's go to A master and I wanted A master to have a dark background, I would put this shape on master bottom because I always want it to show behind everything else. So layers, master bottom. So that I avoid information. Now, when you're in layers, the last one you've clicked is the one that's active. So you always want to make sure that you click on the one that's in the middle, so you're always working on that. Of course, you can create more layers. You can also create a layer. One layer that I always create is guides. That way I can turn them on and off. So there are 4 layers that I always create every time. Okay, so that's that content. So you can see that when I go to a certain page, that shows up correctly every time. And so this content is on pages. The page number shows up where it needs to be, etc. And so that's why I created the inverse, right? So for here, it's white content with a black page number. Here, it's black content with a white page number. Okay, so let's talk about guides. So I'm going to select the guide layer. I'm going to be in my master page. Again, anything I create on my master page will show up on everything else. I'm going to go over to layout, create guides. And so here, I'm going to create the organizational grid structure that I'm going to be working with in the publication. Right now, the preview is set to on. If you hit W, you'll see the working preview, which shows you the margins and will show you the guides. So W is the toggle for that. So I'm going to turn the working preview on, go over to layout and create guides. And you have rows and columns, right? Rows go horizontally, columns go vertically. And so since rows are longer or rows are shorter, I'm going to do 2 rows by 4 columns. And we'll make sure preview is checked so we can see what that looks like. Actually, we'll go 3 rows. And 3. Okay, that looks pretty good based on the page size. And you'll see fit guides to, you can either set them to page or you can set them to the margins. I always check the margins because I work based on the margins, and I rarely have content that isn't an image or a graphic that goes outside the margins like I mentioned earlier. So now these guides have been created on the guide layer. If I uncheck the guide layer, they disappear, which is handy. Or if I hit W, they also disappear because it's showing me the preview of the spread. So that content is there, and because they were applied on the master page, they automatically show up on the actual pages themselves. So I'm going to copy the spread, or the I'm going to copy the guides. Oh, did I hide them? Where'd they go? There they are. Okay. And so I'm going to select all my guides. If you accidentally select content with your guides, the guides will default to not being selected. So if you're selecting your guides, just make sure, I did it on a page and not a master page. My bad. So I'm going to hit Control X to cut them away. I'm going to go back to my master pages, and then I'm going to use paste in place, which will paste them in the exact correct location. And I'll do that for all of my spreads here. So paste in place and paste in place. Okay, so all my guides are set and ready to go. I will use them when I'm creating my graphics as an organizing element, which will make for a pleasing publication. Okay, so now we've got our master pages set up. We have our layers set up. Now we're going to actually start pasting and placing content in here. So images and text to make something that looks good, but also understanding the differences between the two and how you can manipulate them. Okay, so let's start with the cover. Here I'm going to create a large text box and make that large text and set the font. Let's go condensed and call this YDIW. Of course, I'm going to make that white so it shows up. YDIW session 03. And I'm going to use W to place this, right? And so you can use your guides to create or to help you create your composition. Right now that's going past the margin. I'm going to make this smaller. And okay, so there's my cover page. And now I'm going to go into my intro page, and I'm going to place some text here. Now, I don't have any text written, but InDesign is really powerful, so it gives you basically a way to fill with fake text until you have text officially. So I've created a text box that fits in my margins here. I'm going to go over to type, and then at the bottom you'll see fill with placeholder text. And the placeholder text will take, whatever font style you have currently and fill the entire text box with that text, which is really handy to start working with compositions when you're putting a book together. Now, the text box is the boundary or the frame for the text. So if I make a frame that's too small, it will give me a small error here because it's saying, hey, your frame is too small for the text that you have. And so you always want to make sure that you avoid that error and make a text frame that is big enough to display all of your text. But this allows you to really fit it into your composition. And remember, like I said earlier, frames can be customizable. So let's say I create a frame that's irregularly shaped, and I take this text, copy, and I click inside this frame. I can actually paste it in there. So let's say you've got an image composition. You can use that to really create a spread that looks nice. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about character and paragraph styles now that I have you here. So I'm going to move this down. What I'm going to do right now is format this text the way I want the text to be formatted for the entire publication. So I'm going to take this text. We'll make this something that looks a little bit nicer. And I'll actually make it a little gray instead of black. Let's say I do not like InDesign's color picker, honestly. It's my least favorite out of the 3 programs, but we'll use what we got. Let's go to swatches. And go over to color. And we'll use some gray over here. Nice. And right now it's a little small. Let's make it 10 points. Okay, I think that's good. So again, when I do this, I want to make sure that all the text in my publication is the exact same. If I create a new text box right now and I fill it with text, it's going to be the default color and not the one that I just created necessarily unless it's set. So let's say I want to make sure that all of my text is exactly the same, and if I make any changes, that it shows up and affects all of the text boxes at the same time. That's called a paragraph style. If you don't see your paragraph styles, go up to Window, Styles, Character Styles, and Paragraph Styles. They come together, so click on that so they pop up. I already have mine set here, I'm going to set this as a paragraph style. I'm going to hit the little add button right here, and I'm going to go ahead and name the paragraph style. So I'm going to call this body text. And you can see you can edit just about every aspect of that text box here. You can edit the font style, the size. So let's say you've made a bunch of edits and you have a bunch of text boxes and you want to change them all at the same time. You'll use the paragraph style settings to do that. So this is extremely powerful. When I learned this, it saved me a lot of time, and it saved me a lot of hassle from having to go back and make sure every single text box was the same. So I'm going to modify this text box just to show you what the differences are. So this is set to body text, but you'll see a little plus here and that plus represents a modification that I've made to the style. If I double click on the style, it will go back to the default style features, which is handy. But sometimes you want to leave it modified because there's a small change that you made for this particular text box. And so that plus is just saying, hey, it's this text style or this paragraph style, but there's a modification made to it. Okay, now let's say you wanted to create a caption here for this text. So I'm going to go in, hit a space, and type in title. And I'm going to make that bold, condensed, and make it slightly bigger. And I'll make it black instead of gray. Okay, so there's the title for my paragraph text. Now this makes the body text modified, right? Because I've made a modification to the body text. But this is a different style that I want to make sure that is always relevant and something that I can modify again. And so in this case, instead of using a paragraph style for this, I would use a character style. So I'm going to go in and hit plus and call this captions and hit OK. And now that this is a character style, it's actually no longer making the body text modified, because now I can modify the characters at will. So let's say I want all of this text to be that character style. I can do that. And now that text has been modified. And so let's say I want to make them bigger or smaller. Right? I can do that at will, which is handy, and it modifies all of the text automatically. So this is a huge, huge time saver. So character styles and paragraph styles are a must use. Okay. Really quickly, I'm going to show you some document modification elements that you have here. So right now, my page per size is 7 by 9, and I set that earlier before. But let's say I wanted to make that 6.5 by 9. How do you do that? If you go over to the toolbar, you'll see the page tool. This allows you to modify each page individually, one at a time. So I just made that 6.5 by 9. This is still 7 by 9, and we can do that. But the rest of the pages in my spread are still 7 by 9. And so you're not going to go through each and every page and do the same thing. You can modify all the pages at once, of course. Again, working smarter and not harder. So just because you know how to do it one way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way. To modify all of the pages at the same time, you go over to File, Document Setup, and here you can change the master settings. So you can make this 6.5 by 9 here. You can modify the margins. So let's say I wanted it to be 1/4 inch. It defaults to making them all equal, but you can of course make them separate. So if you want like the insides to be still 1/4 inch because you've got a big binding, you unlink it, make that 2, 2, and then inside that. Okay, thank you, I got it. Okay, InDesign, I'll do it your way. 2, and then unlink, so I can make that 5 and 5, and then hit OK. And now all of my pages have been modified. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to normal. Okay, so that's that. Okay, So let's talk about images. So I'm going to go into my pictures here, and I'll grab a really cool wallpaper that I like. These are called polyscapes. I have them as a slideshow on my desktop because I'm OCD and changed my desktop all the time manually, so I decided, let me just have 100 of them and have them cycle through, and so now my OCD is nice and calm. Okay, so I just brought in an image from Image Explorer, and right now this image is absolutely massive, right? So it's so big that it's bigger than the page. So let's make it smaller. So I'm going to modify the frame here, but as you can see, the actual base image didn't move as well, right? So like I said, every image has two components. It has a frame and it has the content. If I double click in the frame, I'll see the actual content line itself. It's still just as big as it was when I brought the file in to start. So I need to modify both the frame and the content on the inside to get the result I want. Now I can do both of them separately, but let's say I have the frame and the content perfectly matched the way I want them to be matched. I can use a tool called AutoFit to modify both of them at the same time. So when you have an image selected, you'll see AutoFit, which is a really small button right here at the top in your ribbon. So I'm going to click AutoFit, and now I can modify both at the same time, and they'll both scale together. Now be careful with this. When you scale, you always need to make sure that you're holding Shift, which will keep the proportions of the width and height the same. If you don't hold Shift, it will skew the image, which you don't want, unless you do want it. But more often than not, you don't want it. So just make sure to check and make sure that AutoFit is checked on or off based on what you need, and you can modify it as necessary. So that's modifying both of them at the same time. If it's unchecked, again, you're modifying the frame, but the content stays the same size.
You can also do that by holding down Control Shift and then scaling it.
Great point. Control Shift toggles AutoFit automatically, which is cool. So if you don't have it unchecked, you can do that. So let's say I want this to be full bleed. I'm going to make the text box this big here. Double click the content and make it big. Now, of course, I'm hiding a lot of the image, but that's the point of the composition here. So let's say I wanted to do something where the frame was customized. So similar to what I did with the text, if I create a custom frame, so that vector shape is there, and let's turn on the strokes just so we can see it for now. Right now it's white. We'll make it not white. So I have the image here, and I'm going to go ahead and make it full screen or full bleed, and then I'm going to cut it by using Control X. I'm going to click on the shape, and then I'm going to right click inside the shape, and you'll see a couple paste options. I'm going to use Paste Into, which will paste that image into the custom shape that I've created, which now creates this really, badass graphic, in my opinion. And I'm going to do the same thing with the text box, so I can create a nice composition between the two. So I'm going to make the text box nice and big. And then I'm going to use so in in Illustrator and InDesign, there are direct selection tools and the regular selection tools, which allow you to modify the vertices of a box or a frame. I'm actually going to use the pen tool to add another notch in my text box, and then I'm going to grab, using the white direct select tool, I'm going to grab that top corner of my text frame and move it, and try to get the spacing here similar. Okay, so now I've got a page that looks pretty weird, but is basically part of a modified composition. So again, when you're working inside InDesign, you've got your frame and your content, and that goes for both images and text. So just make sure that you're aware of both elements when you're modifying that information. All right. Any questions so far of what I've talked about? Okay, so let's talk about some other aspects of InDesign. So right now, you look at the image. If you go to the original image, that image is nice and sharp. It's 1080p. It's crisp. But when you look inside InDesign, it's blurry. Why is that? Well, InDesign has multiple display modes to allow you to work quickly. So if you go over to View and Display Performance, you'll see Fast Display, which basically disables the preview if you've got a lot of content and it's slowing you down. Typical Display, which is a rasterized or low-res version of all of the images. And then, of course, High Quality Display, which shows you the real resolution of all of the content that you have in here. And so that's a master setting under View. And it didn't change. Why are you still low res? Right click. Okay, that's weird. Normally it works. So high performance or high quality, typical quality, and fast quality allows you to change the preview there. Not sure why it's not modifying. Any thoughts?
I ran into an issue once. I was working on a project that was pretty large,
Uh-huh.
and I was new to InDesign, and so I wanted everything to look crisp. So I went and made everything high quality,
Mm-hmm.
and we got down to crunch time, and
You couldn't work.
I'm moving, so terribly slow that I had to close. When I opened it up again, everything moved. Are there ways to kind of deal with that when you're in it? If you open something that's high,
It just goes straight to View, Display Performance, Typical, and that'll change all of them at the same time. You can modify certain images specifically. So, for example, I've been clicking on this image to make it high res. I don't know why it isn't.
You can also do overprint preview, which I think is
That looks cool.
so that shows it to you as what it would look like when it's
printed.
So it's probably the colors look different because it's switched to CMYK.
Right.
But it also puts it in the highest quality.
And that's something that's really important to mention. The differences between CMYK and RGB. I did go into detail about this in the Photoshop session, so be sure to check that out to see it in more detail. But basically, CMYK is pigment and is a subtractive color model, and RGB is additive, and it's basically light. And so light meaning screens. So if you're working on something that's going to be showed on screen, whether that's your phone, your computer, TV, all screens display in RGB. But if you're printing, you need to make sure you're using CMYK. And you can set that up early in the document. If you go to, trying to remember, is it under preferences and then color mode, right? Let's type composition. There's always 1,000 settings in here. File handling. Or is that Illustrator that does that? Or export. Version output. Right, you do that at the... Did you find it?
No,
Not
we had
quite.
a different issue.
Okay. Yeah, I used to know how to do this, and now I can't remember. Maybe it's on the export side. So if, let's say I export to an image. Okay. So the color space in InDesign, which is weird, is modified on the export side versus the import side. So just be aware of that as you're working. But of course, there's most definitely a way to modify it on the fly. So just Google search it. Okay. All right.
Oh,
So
it's in color, and then when you click the multi-line, and then you change it.
View or
So to the right.
So the triple line.
there we go.
Yeah, you change it there.
Yeah, but that's modifying like the content that you're creating, not the whole document, right? And here's what we want to do in that case. But
I think it's for
anyway, just always make sure that you're working in the right color space in any program that you're working on for its eventual purpose. Obviously, you can't do that for every project. So, for example, a portfolio will be printed and shown digitally. So just be aware of the different colors that will appear when you're working in those file formats for those types of projects. Let's talk about errors really quickly. So there's an error right here, like I mentioned earlier. This text box is too small for the text that's embedded. And you'll see that that error is at the bottom here. This is called pre-flight. If you double click on pre-flight, you'll see, and usually pre-flight is a floating window, but I've docked it. You'll see all of the errors in your document. So missing links will show up here. So if I, for example, move this image from its location in my file explorer, if I move it into pictures, I've just broken that link. So if I go back to InDesign, InDesign is going to do a quick search, and it's going to say, hey, that link is now missing. And so missing link, which just means this image is no longer here. So if you go over to the red, question mark and double click on it, you need to go ahead and relocate that image, right? So you're going to go back through and find it. In this case, I'm not going to go through that because that's in the wallpaper that I want in the right location. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it back in the folder. But that's how you relink images that are missing. And then with the text box, it's obviously an easier fix. You just need to make sure the text box is big enough to show all of the text. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and delete some of this fake text so that error goes away. And by the way, all the fake text, the placeholder text, is actually a real passage from a Latin book. I can't remember which one, but the Aeneid, yeah, which is really cool. So if you can read Latin, that's actually a real phrase. Okay, let's talk about exports, and then I think, unless there's anything else that I'm missing that's like a pro tip, I just want to make sure people are aware of all of that stuff, but we'll get to that. So let's say you do want to move your InDesign file from one location to another, and you want all of the links to follow along, and all your fonts and other crucial elements that allow your InDesign document to look exactly the same as it did on a different computer. You go over to package, and package allows you to basically create a package that combines both the file. Oh, you need to save first, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. YDIW ID. So once a file is saved, it then gives you the export options. You have all of these options to check here that will be included in the package. So I definitely want to copy fonts, except for any Adobe fonts that you've downloaded using Typekit, which, if you're working with someone else who's using Adobe, should follow along. But if it's a font that you've downloaded, you want to make sure that it's included. So go ahead and check that box. Copy linked graphics, updated link graphics. Use Adobe document hyphenation exceptions. If you're working with any hyphenation exceptions, click that box. Include fonts and links from hidden content. So that hidden content is content that's outside of the spread. IDML is basically an InDesign format that can open in any version of InDesign. So right now I'm working in CC. If I'm sending this package to someone who's still working in CS6, which, why are you still working in CS6? But a lot of people still are working in CS6 because it's free, because you bought it once and you don't have to pay monthly subscription. So I'm actually not going to disparage people who still work in CS6. Anyway, you want to make sure you're including an IDML, which is a version of the InDesign document that can be opened on any version of InDesign. And then you can, if you want, to include a PDF print, which is basically the exported document in PDF format, if you want to include that as well. And then you give the folder a name and you save it to the correct location. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and hit OK. And it's exporting all of that content. And now if I go back to that location, you'll see that that folder is there with the InDesign document, the PDF, all of the links, which is that image. But of course, if you have more images, the links will be included here. And then the document fonts, which are the fonts that I'm using in the document, all come included in the package. You can zip that file. So using, send to compressed folder, hit OK, and then now that package is ready to email to a coworker, client, collaborator, etc., or a classmate if you're in school. So packages are super important. Use them, please.
And the package gathers links and text.
Everything. Everything's included in the package. So links, every image in your file is there, and fonts are also there in the package. Okay, I think that's... Oh, so let's talk about some of the fun things that InDesign can do, and how you can make it look really nice. Did that? Oh, wait, maybe I didn't go through and put that on. Just wanted to do this. Oh, I did. Okay, then that should show up above. One sec. Oh, that's in my guides layer and not in my pages layer. There we go. So just make sure that the correct layer is created that you're working in. Otherwise, you'll have content not showing up correctly. Okay. So let's talk about some of the interactive tools that InDesign has that allows you to basically create an interactive PDF. So I'm going to go over to Window and Interactive. You'll see a bunch of options here. Bookmarks and buttons and forms are what we're going to be using now. And this allows you to create active buttons, or let's say you have a table of contents. You can create a table of contents that's a live link that you can use to basically move around the publication quicker than flipping from page to page. So the first thing you need to do is create a bookmark. So let's say I want to bookmark to this page. I'm going to go ahead and hit New, and I'm going to call this Intro. And so now this spread is linked to the bookmark intro. I'm going to go over to Button, and I'm going to create a table of contents, rough table of contents really quickly. So I'm going to go over to Pages. I'm going to add 2 new pages and set them to... I'm going to duplicate that master page and have that just be white with nothing on it. And apply that master page. Make sure you close things so your pages show up properly. Okay. And demaster, I'll apply it there and there. Okay, and then we'll just do this real quick. If you hit Control-Alt-C, that will make any text frames fit the text exactly, which is very handy. Again, that's Control-Alt and then C. Or if you right-click on the text box, you can go over to Fitting, and you'll see Fit Frame to Content, and the key I just talked about, which does the same thing. Okay, and then a quick text frame, and then I'll create a text box and say intro. Okay, and we'll make that much bigger just because that is too small. Okay, now I'm going to create a box. Actually, what I'll just do is this. So intro will then link to intro, and this is how you do it. So I'm going to go ahead and select that box. I'm going to go over to buttons. I'm going to turn it into a button. I'm going to go over to type, button, click. I'm going to name this intro. And then the event is what you want to happen when you do a certain action on that button. And those actions are called events. You can hit click, roll over, roll off, focus, and blur. In this case, I'm going to hit on click. So what that means is when I click on this button, a certain action will happen. And I can customize what action that is. So actions are here. I'm going to hit the plus. And in this case, I'm going to hit go to destination. And you can see all of the different options you have here. Go to first page, go to last page, go to next page, previous page, etc. Go to URL. So if you want this interactive PDF to act like a website, you can do that. In this case, go to destination. And the destination is the intro bookmark. It automatically came in since it's the only bookmark I have in the document. But all of your bookmarks will show up here. And you can also customize how that interactive button looks when you roll over it, which is really cool. So in this case, it just looks like normal text. When I click on it and go over to roll over, so what happens when my mouse moves over that button, what does it look like? I can customize that. So let's say I want it to invert. And so if you hit the direct selection tool and select the box, you can customize the color of the box behind the text. So let's say I want that frame, right? The frame to be to have a black fill, and then I want the text to be white instead of black. Right? So that's what it's going to look like when my mouse rolls over. So normal still looks like that. Roll over looks like that, and then click, I can have that be a completely different look. So let's say I want it to look like when I click, the text will turn red or something. So colors, swatches, let's hit red. And then let's make the box black. Okay, so there's my button. And in order to see this in action, you can do, if you go over to Window Interactive, you can go over to EPBU Preview, Interactive Preview, which shows you basically a preview of what that would look like. So you can see when I roll over, it turns black, and then it turns black and white, and then red when I click on it. Right now, do I have that set to work properly? Yep. Destination, intro. Yeah. Anyway, let's give it a test. Let's go ahead and export it. When you export it, you want to make sure you hit Adobe PDF Interactive. Usually when you're exporting a normal PDF from InDesign, you're going to use PDF print, but in this case, we want to use it PDF interactive, so we can actually see the interactive features that we've created in the PDF. When you're exporting a PDF, there's some things I want to talk about here really quickly. You'll see whether you want to export it as a page or spread. You can customize which pages export or all of them. So if you only want to export pages 2 and 3, you can hit range and check 2 to 3 there, right? And that'll export just that page. So that's handy if you've got the entire book already exported, but you caught a mistake on page 53, but you don't want to sit and wait for the entire book to export again. You can just export page 53, and then using Adobe Acrobat, you can insert that page or replace that page as necessary. But anyway, pages and spreads. So pages will export each page as its individual page. If you export spreads, it will combine the spreads, the 2 pages of a spread together, and they'll act as one page. This is handy if you're sending a digital portfolio to a client by PDF. This is not handy if you're printing or if you're uploading to issue. So just be careful as to which one is selected based on the output you want. In this case, I want it to be a spread because I want to see the whole spread at once. Of course, Adobe Acrobat has multi-page preview options, so you can see what a spread looks like. But in this case, I'm not going to go through all that hassle. I'm going to export it as spreads. I'm going to hit export. It's going to export my interactive PDF. And now if I go to the fake table of contents I created, you can see that the interactive button is working in terms of rollover. And when I click, yay, it went to the bookmark. So this could be really cool if you want to create a pseudo website that you can then send to a website designer who can then say, okay, I get the gist of your website. Now I'm going to code it. So that could be one use of it. Right now I'm a part of the AIS Learning, Design, and Technology Committee, and we're using the interactive PDF as a way to create an informational tool for AIS members in terms of software and technology integration. It's hard to code all of that stuff in the time that we have, but interactive PDF is one way where we can skip that process and get to the results very quickly. So a very cool feature that InDesign has, and it's one of many. And this has basically just been an intro to all of the things that it can do. But again, just like any Adobe program, it's always important to take a deep dive and really see what it has to offer and not just get stuck doing only the things that you know how to do, right? So, its tools are very powerful. One tool that just came to mind that I want to show before we close is, let's say you have, and this also works in Illustrator as well. Let's say you have multiple objects on your page that are really sporadically organized, but you want to make them nice and clean and straight. If you select them all, you'll see your align tools. Align tools are very handy for making quick, clean organizations of content. So I can justify them all to the left. I can justify them all to the right, which happens when I do that. I can justify them by their center. I can justify by them at the top, by the middle, or by the bottom. I can also equidistant space them and use that to create do I have the button also selected? Equidistant spacing, and then I can line them up like that. So now they're equidistant spaced, and that equidistant spacing will take into account the first object and the last object. So, these tools are really powerful for really creating fast compositions that are clean and that look good. So always pay attention to the tools that you see in your ribbon when something is selected because they're very handy. Any questions about anything I've shown? Awesome. So if you created an awesome composition and you want to share it with the rest of the YDIW squad, just send it to me and I'll share it. Or don't. That's fine. But yeah, so thank you for coming to the third session of You're Doing It Wrong. This time I actually ended on time. It's 8:30 on the dot. Usually my sessions go over like 2 hours. But in this case, hour and a half is a good bit of time. I've shown a lot of information. So go through, pause the video if you're new to InDesign, This is a great video for that. If you aren't new to InDesign and you've been using it for a long time, I hope you learned something new, which is typically the case when you know a lot about a program. You tend to pick up one thing or two things, but not a lot. So hopefully I did show something that you didn't know in the session. But yeah, the next session will be on Illustrator. We're going to take a deep dive into creating awesome vector graphics. Graphics that are really cool logos that you're designing for a friend, or graphics for the church that you go to, right? So vector graphics that are really powerful and that can do really cool things in other programs like After Effects and Premiere Pro, and we'll get to that later in the year. But I'm really excited about the Illustrator session. If you're going to ask me which Adobe program is my favorite, I'm going to say Illustrator. Illustrator is my favorite. But all the other ones, of course, have their purpose, so use them. But anyway, we'll see you at the next session next month. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. And we'll talk to you later.